Hello and welcome. My name is Alan. This was meant to be Thursday's video for 2025-2026 state governments and officials. It's still late, and a lot of things happen that still try to push it even later, but we're not getting there yet. Anyway, today we are looking at the state of Missouri, or Missouri. Just don't call it Miss Our Eye, as it's actually spelled. But anyway, let's go ahead and jump into this. A look at the state first. State of Missouri, also known as the Show Me State, Cave State, or Mother of the West. I don't know why they're called the Show Me State. I have genitalia. Show me. No. Cave State. Okay, I guess. Sure. And then Mother of the West. I can see that. Lewis and Clark started out from St. Louis, Missouri, so to explore the Louisiana Purchase. But anyway, yeah, interesting state. You can see how the Mississippi River kind of makes the border here. But yeah. Missouri, interesting state. Got St. Louis, like what, right here? I know it's supposed to be pretty close to Tennessee, so. But with St. Louis still being so interestingly large and stuff, it's not even the largest city or the capital. Your capital is Jefferson City. Your largest city is Kansas City. So St. Louis is on the east and Kansas City on the west, where it shares a border with Kansas. Let's scroll down. Yeah, stayed in the Midwestern region of the U.S., ranking 21st in land area. It borders Iowa to the north, Illinois, Kentucky, and Tennessee to the east, Arkansas to the south, and Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska to the west. It has over 6 million residents and is the 19th most populous state. So 19th most populous in what is the 21st biggest state. The largest urban areas are the city of St. Louis, the city of Kansas City, the city of Springfield, not to be confused necessarily with where The Simpsons is made out of. There's so many Springfields out there. And Columbia. And again, capital is Jefferson City. So yeah. I think the notable tribes in the area were the Missouri and the Osage. Yeah. Osage, Missouri. But let's look at the Constitution. As we see, 1945, so it's clear they've had more than one. Let's see. The first Constitution, written by Constitutional Convention in 1820, was written up in only 38 days. Actually, fairly quick for a constitution of any of the states, or federally for that matter. It was adopted July 19th, 1820, as part of the results for the Missouri Compromise, saying Missouri was initially admitted to the Union as a slave state, and the Constitution specifically excluded free Negroes and mulattoes. So, yeah. Missouri Compromise, at this point in history, remember, there was a strong issue against and for slavery. Because, number one, the southern states, it was economically viable. You could make money. They didn't have the industry the North had. You know, they didn't have the population the North had. But when you had slaves, you could still have production. And they did the 3/5 compromise, counting slaves as 3/5 of a people, to try to strengthen up population. So yeah, it was a big part of that whole period. It was, we almost thought the nation would go to war over Missouri, but the Missouri Compromise kicked the can further down the road. But yeah, 1820, 1821 was it becomes a official as a constitution. And yeah, became the 24th state. In 1845, there was a constitution the voters rejected. So, matter of little over 20 years later, they rejected another. During the Civil War, the Missouri Constitutional Convention, 1861 to 1863, they were elected to answer whether they would secede or not. They chose against secession and did not produce a new constitution, instead operating as a de facto pro-union government of Mississippi. So yeah. Now, there is an interesting part to this. They were part of what were technically slave states that were used as a border because they still stayed with the Union. So, Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Maryland did not secede. West Virginia, in fact, was created specifically to help shore up this border of states. They were the borderline states. And yes, that includes Maryland, because Maryland, technically, the top of it is where the Mason-Dixon line is. So yeah. Now, like I said, West Virginia created out of Virginia to help shore up this group of states. Kentucky, Maryland, Missouri, and West Virginia created, so that there was a border between North and South. And remember, Washington, D.C. was right on the border of Virginia inside Maryland. So, yeah. Although the southern capital was in the state of Richmond, just only a little bit south. They eventually would move it further, but that was in the later dying days of the war, so that the war wouldn't automatically end. But yeah, for the great portion, Richmond. So you had Washington, D.C., Richmond. Washington, D.C., Richmond. But anyway, let's get back over here to Missouri. Missouri decided not to secede, and in the new Constitutional Convention, they passed a second Missouri state constitution that abolished slavery, and it was approved in June 1865. So, right around the time the actual Civil War was coming to an end. So, first one got your first constitution, second one did not provide one, third one did, and then you had a fourth constitutional convention only 10 years later in 1875, drafting the state's third constitution. And it provided for, among other things, separate schools for African American children. Because remember, it still is technically a slave state, even though it didn't secede from the Union. So yeah, separate but equal, well, not necessarily equal, but separate, yeah. Pretty common. State got a fifth constitution, or well, had its fifth constitutional convention in 1920 to 1923, proposed a slate of 21 amendments instead of a new constitution. The delegates assembled for a little over a year. Ballot form permitted a separate vote on each amendment with a simple majority allowing adoption. 7 of the 21 amendments were adopted, and yeah. So I don't know if they necessarily got a new constitution, but they got new amendments. Now your 6th Constitutional Convention, 1940, and the initiative was passed by voters in 1942. Voters ratified the Constitution of 1945, and that Constitution remains Missouri's current Constitution. So 6 constitutional conventions before they finally sitting on one that they haven't had to change or replace, we should say. So yeah, they amend them, but that's the current one. Now, let's go ahead and look at the government of Missouri. Let's see. State, local government, county, city, municipal. Constitution we've talked about. It is a 3-branch form of government, as all have been up to now: executive, legislative, and judicial. It tells us, with everything we have fucking seen, that the founders did not want more kings. Yet we have a dumbass in office who thinks that's perfectly fucking fine and takes massive dumps on the Constitution while it's on fire. But, yeah. Legislative branch, Missouri General Assembly, which is a bicameral, 2-chambered body with a House of Representatives, the lower house, and a Senate, the upper house. Members of both houses are subject to term limits, with senators limited to 2 4-year terms, a total of 8 years, and representatives to 4 2-year terms, again, 8 years. Constitution provides that the General Assembly shall meet on the first Wednesday after the first Monday in January, following each general election. The General Assembly shall reconvene on the first Wednesday after the first Monday of January, after adjournment at midnight on May 30th of the preceding year. So there's a whole half a year they do not meet. As a part-time legislature, compensation is low. State legislatures as of 2024 received an annual salary of $40,000 serving in state government. And again, the General Assembly meets in the Missouri State Capitol in Jefferson City. The executive branch, laid out in Article 4 of Missouri State Constitution, headed by the governor. They are elected to a 4-year term and can serve 2 terms and must be at least 30 years of age. Missouri resident for at least 10 years and a U.S. citizen for at least 15 years before holding office. Governor appoints members of the cabinet. The lieutenant governor has the same qualifications as the governor, and is an ex officio president of the state senate. Just meaning he serves as tie-breaking vote and everything and all that, like you have in the U.S. Senate in a number of states. Not all of them, but number of states do that as well. The lieutenant governor is allowed to debate any and all questions before the Senate as a whole and may cast the deciding ballot in case of a tie. They do assume the office of governor in case of the governor's death, resignation, or incapacitation. And Missouri voters also elect the heads of several executive departments: Missouri Attorney General, Missouri Secretary of State, State Treasurer for Missouri, State Auditor. The requirements are the same for those of the governor, but only the treasurer has term limits like the governor does. Now, while we're on the executive branch, let's look at the governor of Missouri. Your current governor is Mike Keogh. Get me another drink here. But yeah, Of course, head of the government for Missouri, Commander-in-Chief of the Missouri National Guard, can approve or veto bills passed in the Missouri legislature, can convene the legislature, and grant pardons except in cases of impeachment. Again, it's only state level. They have no control over national level pardons in cases. So, the state of Missouri was originally part of Louisiana Territory. It was Louisiana Territory, and then named Missouri Territory on June 4th, 1812, after the admission of the state of Louisiana. So the remaining territory became Missouri Territory. During the time of Louisiana and Missouri Territory, your governors of it as a territory, we had James Wilkinson, appointed by Thomas Jefferson, Meriwether Lewis, appointed by Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Howard, appointed by James Monroe, and finally William Clark, who was appointed by, Howard was appointed by James Madison. Clark was appointed by Madison and reappointed by Monroe. So yeah. Now, 1821, August 10th, Missouri became a state. And the first governor of the state was Alexander McNair. He was followed by Frederick Bates, then Abraham J. Williams, John Miller, Daniel Duncan, Lilburn Boggs, Thomas Reynolds, Meredith Miles Marmaduke, Triple M, John Cummins Edwards, and Austin Augustus King. Just seeing if I recognize any names. Nope, looks like they were all people who weren't necessarily governors before, so some states we see back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Doesn't look like Missouri had that kind of situation, so that's kind of interesting. But yeah, the governors of Missouri, and like I said, your current governor, Mike Keogh. With that said, let's look at the other members, elected officials in the executive department for Missouri. Of course, we spoke of Keogh, your lieutenant governor, David Wassinger, your secretary of state, Denny Hoskins, your auditor for state, Scott Fitzpatrick, how about that? Will you show us a little more about auditor? No. Biography? There he is, Scott Fitzpatrick. Your state treasurer, Vivek Malik. Your Missouri Attorney General, supposed to be a Catherine L. Hanaway. There we go. A.G. Hanaway. There she is. And then we have the cabinet for Keogh. The cabinet departments. But here we have a list as of January 2025. Cabinet members. Missouri Office of Administration's Kenneth J. Zellers. Missouri Department of Agriculture, Chris Chin. Missouri Department of Conservation, Stephen D. Harrison. Missouri Department of Corrections, Trevor Foley. Missouri Department of Economic Development, Michelle Hadaway. Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, Marjorie Vandeven. Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services, Paula F. Nicholson. Missouri Department of Higher Education, Bennett Boggs. Missouri Department of Commerce and Insurance, Clora Lindley Myers. Missouri Department of Labor and Industrial Relations, Anna Hui. Missouri Department of Mental Health, Valerie Hunn. Missouri National Guard, Levin E. Compton. Missouri Department of Natural Resources, Drew Bunton. Missouri Department of Public Safety, Mark S. James. Missouri Department of Revenue, Wayne Wallingford. Missouri Department of Social Services, Robert J. Noddell. And Missouri Department of Transportation, Patrick K. McKenna. And that's the cabinet for Missouri. And the executive branch. With that done, let's look at the General Assembly of Missouri, the legislative branch. As we talked about, bicameral body with a Senate and House. Talked about the 8 years in either body. Leadership. Senate President is the Lieutenant Governor, David Wassinger. Senate President Pro Tempore, Cindy O'Laughlin. And House Speaker, John Patterson. Now, let's look at the chambers here. Upper chamber, the Senate, 34 seats. And again, that's why the vice president's in there as a tiebreaker. But I doubt he needs to use that ability, because it is overwhelmingly red with 24 Republicans and 10 Democrats out of the 34 seats. Your House is 163 seats, consisting of 111 Republicans, 51 Democrats, and 1 vacant seat. So yeah, and again, remember they meet in Jefferson City in the Capitol building of Missouri. Elections are conducted using first past the post voting in single member districts of roughly equal population. We've seen variations, states having multiple members in a district. We've seen, I don't know if we've seen something beyond first past the post, but I know we've seen multiple members in a district, and you won't roughly equal population. That's just common sense. According to a recent poll from St. Louis University in 2024, the Missouri General Assembly had a 45% approval. So, people agree with it for the most part. There's still plenty of contention and disapproval on things they do, but for a government body, that's pretty good. You look at the federal Congress, Lord of mercy. I think it's high teens, low 20s. So yeah, Missouri's General Assembly does pretty good. House of Representatives qualifications: 24 years of age and must be a qualified Missouri voter for 2 years and a resident in the county or district where they're of their constituency for a year. Senators must be 30 years of age, qualified Missouri voter for 3 years, and a resident of the constituency for 1 year prior to election. Let's see. Okay, so that's a look at the legislation, the Missouri General Assembly. Now let's look at the judicial branch, the court system. Judges are elected to a term length of 12 years. There are 7 judges, so likely 6 associates and 1 Chief Justice. Pursuant to Article 5, Section 3 of the Missouri Constitution, the Supreme Court has exclusive jurisdiction on cases that speak of the validity of United States statute or treaty. Is it? I'm assuming it's talking about the state Supreme Court, not the Supreme Court. But anyway, seems weird it has validity over state United States statute. The validity of Missouri statutes or constitutional provisions, the state's revenue laws, challenges to a statewide election, elected officials' right to hold office, and imposition of the death penalty. So there's just some things that must go to the Missouri Supreme Court. So yeah. If it determines that a question of general interest and importance is involved, the laws should be re-examined, or that the lower court's decision conflicts with an earlier appellate decision, cases can be transferred to the Supreme Court, even though normally the Court of Appeals would handle it. Even after making a decision, the Court of Appeals may transfer a case to the Supreme Court. Just basically an appeal saying, we've made our decision, but there's still disagreement on this. We need to know. Missouri Supreme Court hears all impeachments of elected officers, so that's something they handle directly. The Supreme Court also supervises lower state courts with the assistance of the Office State Courts Administrator, who oversees court programs, provides technical assistance, manages the budget of the state's judicial branch, and conducts educational programs. Judges for the Missouri Supreme Court are selected through the Missouri Nonpartisan Court Plan, or Missouri Plan. So, yeah. Notable cases. Current judges. Your Chief Justice of the Missouri Supreme Court, W. Brent Powell. His Associate Justices, Mary Rhodes Russell, Zell Fisher, Paul C. Wilson, Robin Ransom, Kelly C. Broniak, and Ginger Gooch. Now, with that, let's look at the Missouri Court of Appeals. The next court down, just short of the Supreme Court, apparently split into the 3 locations: Kansas City for Western Court, St. Louis Eastern Court, and Springfield in the South. So yeah, those 3 geographic districts make up the Court of Appeals. I'm surprised they don't have one for North. But, yeah. They handle those districts. But yeah. The final stop before Supreme Court if the appeals wish to go further. Though the Supreme Court of Missouri may and often does reject an appeal from the Court of Appeals. So here's the districts kind of colored in. Your Western District, which is Kansas City. Your Eastern District, which is St. Louis. I was thinking St. Louis was further down here, but it's up here. More along the lines of Kentucky. And Southern District of Springfield. Missouri Court of Appeals has jurisdiction over all appeals, except for those that are the exclusive jurisdiction of the Missouri Supreme Court. We already talked about that. Judges, 14 judges in the Eastern District, 11 in the West, and 7 in the South. So yeah, Eastern District, St. Louis, Western District, Kansas City, and Southern District, Springfield. But yeah, that's a look at the Court of Appeals. Finally, the Missouri Circuit Courts. The state trial courts of original jurisdiction and general jurisdiction. The circuit courts have original jurisdiction over all cases and matters, civil and criminal. They may issue and determine original remedial writs and shall sit at times and places within the circuit as predetermined by the circuit court. Procedures for the adjudication of small claims shall be as provided by law. So yeah. List of your circuits: 46 judicial circuits for the circuit courts, each with various divisions, including associate circuits, small claims, municipal, family, probate, criminal, and juvenile, each circuit covering at least one of Missouri's 114 counties, and one independent city, St. Louis. So yeah. So yeah, St. Louis County, City of St. Louis. But yeah, your general courts more or less are the circuit courts for the state. That's more than likely where you're going to start off with any cases. So, but we'll go ahead and end this episode here. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll be putting my links and sources in the description box below the video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.